ADX Florence sits alone in the Colorado desert, a concrete beast surrounded by miles of nothing. No towns nearby, no shelters, no trees, just empty land, red dust, and the cold wind that scrapes across the Rocky Mountains and whispers against the razor wire fences. The outside world calls ADX the Alcatraz of the Rockies. The inmates call it something else. The place where hope goes to die. Every inch of the prison is designed to crush escape before the thought even forms. Towers see everything. Motion sensors react to the smallest vibration. Cameras track movement from angles inmates never see. Inside, the walls are so thick they swallow sound. Even a man screaming would sound like someone whispering underwater. But one inmate wasn't screaming. He wasn't whispering. He wasn't talking at all. His name was Marcus Hale. To the guards, Marcus was one of the easiest inmates in the entire facility. He didn't fight, didn't argue, didn't curse, didn't pace around his cell like most men did to kill time. He sat, read, ate, and slept quietly. In fact, Marcus was so quiet that guards often joked. If they all behaved like Hale, ADX wouldn't need half its systems. But that silence wasn't peace. It was calculation. Marcus had something most inmates lacked: patience. The kind of patience that let a man stare at the same wall for hours, not because he was bored, but because he was studying how the afternoon light hit the metal. From the moment he arrived, Marcus began observing, not rushing, not planning a fast escape. No, Marcus didn't believe in rushing anything. He believed in patterns. And living in ADX meant being surrounded by patterns. Breakfast trays delivered at the exact same minute every morning. Cell checks performed with the same rhythm every shift. Maintenance crews walking the same routes. Lights powering down at predictable intervals. Guard rotations that always had the same weak link. Marcus didn't see a prison. He saw a system. And every system, no matter how perfect, had one truth. Systems fail where humans relax. For months, Marcus listened. He tracked footsteps. He counted the number of seconds each guard lingered at each cell door. He memorized the sound of every key slipping into every lock. He studied the way the light bounced off the hallway cameras, learning their blind spots by watching tiny glints of reflection. Even the way guards breathed told him something. Heavy breathing meant stress. Soft breathing meant routine. Routine meant predictability. Predictability meant opening. 1 hour of rec time a day wasn't recreation to Marcus. It was reconnaissance. While other inmates shouted, vented exercise, or argued, Marcus stood still, lifting his chin, watching the sky through the cage bars, measuring the angle of the sun. He learned how the shadows inside his unit shifted. He learned where the cameras momentarily struggled with glare. He learned that the wind changed direction after 3 p.m., causing dust to blow along certain walls more heavily. To the others, it was nothing. To Marcus, it was data. Every piece mattered. Every observation fit into a map he was building silently behind his eyes. But he never pushed his luck, never moved suspiciously, never acted differently from the calm inmate everyone already believed he was. Because Marcus knew something the other inmates didn't. You never attempt impossible until you understand impossible completely. So he waited and watched and learned. And then, on one afternoon that seemed as routine as any other, when the hallway was quiet and the guards were finishing their rotations, Marcus discovered something so small and so insignificant that no one else would have ever noticed it. But for Marcus, it was the beginning. As he sat on the edge of his bunk, he leaned forward to tie his shoe, an act so ordinary it meant nothing to anyone. His eyes fell naturally toward the lower right corner of the ventilation grate near the floor. Except something was wrong. There was a crack, thin, barely visible, but definitely there. A hairline fracture on the edge of the metal. Marcus froze, not in fear, in recognition. This wasn't natural wear. This wasn't old age. This was the result of a rushed installation. He knew the prison had a maintenance cycle. Every few years, certain cell components were replaced: grates, bolts, screws, panels. If 2 staff members rushed the job or didn't tighten a corner perfectly, a flaw like this could appear. Not enough to escape through. Not enough to notice on camera. But enough to tell Marcus one crucial truth. Perfection had cracked. He leaned closer, pretending to wipe dust from a wall. He pressed the edge with the back of his knuckle. There was movement. Not much, but enough. Marcus sat back slowly, breathing through his nose, heartbeat steady. That was it, the moment he'd been waiting for. Not an open door, not a loose lock, not an opportunity. A weakness, small, overlooked, but deadly if exploited correctly. Marcus wasn't naive. He knew the grate wasn't a doorway to escape. It was the first domino. If he could open it silently, slowly, and invisibly, it could lead to the ventilation shaft. The shaft could lead to the service corridor. The service corridor could lead to the restricted utility network. And the utility network, if mapped correctly, it could lead to the one place inmates were never meant to reach. A place where guards walk alone. Marcus didn't smile, didn't let his expression change. He simply looked at the crack, then looked away. He didn't plan to touch it that night, or the next night, because Marcus knew escape wasn't about forcing your way out. It was about earning the moment where the impossible becomes possible, and that moment had just arrived. The cell was barely wider than Malik's outstretched arms, but tonight it felt even smaller. The blue safety lights that washed over the tier every night flickered faintly, casting long shadows that crawled along the concrete like ghosts of prisoners who never left. Malik sat on the edge of his bunk, elbows on knees, breathing slow the way Carver had taught him. Every inhale was a calculation. Every exhale was a warning to himself. Move too fast, and you're dead. ADX wasn't like any other prison he had known. Here, sound itself felt illegal. Even the guards walked like they were afraid of waking something they couldn't fight. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was pressure. It pushed down on your skull until you started talking to walls just to hear a voice. But Malik didn't break. He couldn't. Not when something bigger than survival was on the line. Tonight was the first phase. Carver's voice echoed in his head. In here, timing is everything. One wrong second, and the whole plan becomes your obituary. Malik lifted the plastic meal tray from earlier, flipping it over. Embedded in the underside, glued with toothpaste, patience, and hope, was a small piece of polished metal Carver had smuggled out from the kitchen disposal unit. Crude, jagged, but priceless. A mirror, not for vanity, for vision, because the only way to see the pattern of the rotating guards was through the reflection of the security lights on the far wall. ADX didn't give prisoners angles, but Malik found one. He slid off the bunk and positioned the mirror under the gap in the steel door. The blue glow spilled underneath, catching the metal at a perfect angle. A distorted reflection shimmered back at him. Boots, movements, intervals, predictability. Carver was right. They weren't machines. They had routines. 17 seconds between each patrol on the west wing. 22 on the east. Every 90 minutes, a blind spot as officers rotated to the surveillance hub, and in that blind spot, a door on Tier C, broken for weeks, would fail to autolock. Malik whispered to himself, not out of fear, but focus. 17 seconds. That's the opening. He returned to his bunk as a guard passed, boots thudding with military precision. The lights changed. The unit hummed. Somewhere above, an inmate screamed into the void and was swallowed whole by the silence again. Malik stared up at the ceiling, fighting the heaviness settling in his chest. ADX wasn't meant to be escaped. It was designed to erase you slowly. But he wasn't planning to die here. Not when the truth he carried was bigger than the walls built to contain it. Tonight was only observation. Tomorrow, preparation. The real move came after that. Because Malik knew something no one else did. The weakness of ADX wasn't its security. It was the men who believed it was unbreakable, and he intended to prove them wrong. Malik didn't sleep that night. He didn't dare. His mind was drawing invisible diagrams against the concrete ceiling. Timelines, guard patterns, sound ranges, and the tiny cracks in a fortress designed to have none. By morning, he had the skeleton of a plan. By afternoon, he had muscle on its bones. By midnight, he had a fully breathing escape strategy. But he needed one more thing. Carver. Carver wasn't a friend. He wasn't even an ally. He was a man who respected only two currencies, information and leverage. Malik had both. The guard slid breakfast through the slot. Powdered eggs, stale toast, and a sealed plastic cup of blue electrolyte water. Everything in ADX had that same tint of blue. Even the silence felt cold. When the tears settled, Malik tapped lightly on the vent. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. Their code. Carver tapped back. Phase 2, Malik whispered through the metal. Carver's voice was a low growl. You sure you're ready for that? I don't have a choice. A long pause. Then what do you need? Malik leaned closer. I need access to the service shaft behind Tier C before the rotation tonight. Carver exhaled, a dangerous sound. Boy, the only way you get near that shaft is if you get moved, and the only way you get moved is if something forces their hand. I know. You're talking about a code blue. I know. Another silence, thicker, heavier. A code blue was a kind of emergency that made ADX scramble. Medical panic, full protocol shift, temporary structural vulnerabilities. Exactly the kind of chaos Malik needed. But it also meant one thing. He would have to put himself at risk. Serious risk. Carver's tone shifted, this time, not mocking, not distant, almost warning. Once you start this, there's no pause button. They will come for you hard. Malik smiled to himself. They already came for me. I'm just returning the favor. Carver grunted. All right, then you better be ready to bleed for it. Malik slipped the sharpened metal sliver from the mirror under his mattress edge. Not a weapon. A tool. He dragged the plastic cup of blue water closer and dipped his fingers into it, smearing the liquid across his wrist. The cameras would see it. They would assume the worst. Then, when the timing aligned, 17 seconds between patrols, 22 before the sweep, Malik pressed the tip of the metal into the softest part of his arm. Not deep, not lethal, just enough to spark panic, enough to trigger protocol, enough to get him exactly where he needed to be. Carver whispered through the vent, listening for the guards. Do it now. Malik inhaled once, exhaled slow. The metal flashed. A sting, a drop of red, a smear of blue water. He stumbled back from the door and collapsed just as heavy boots thundered down the corridor. Code blue. Cell C 217. Alarms erupted. Blue lights flipped into violent white. Sirens wailed through the fortress like something had finally gone wrong in the unbreakable machine. Malik let his body go limp as the door burst open, and 2 guards rushed inside. As they lifted him, he opened his eyes just enough to see down the hall. The service shaft door. Unlocked, unattended, open for seconds. Seconds he intended to use. Because Malik wasn't dying today. He was beginning. The service shaft was narrower than Malik imagined. Concrete walls pressed against his shoulders. Cold metal cut into his arms. The faint echo of his own breathing bounced back at him, amplified, as if the prison itself were whispering, "You don't belong here." But Malik didn't care. This was the moment he had been building toward for months, years, even every observation, every silent calculation, every minute of patience was culminating here. He inched forward, hands, knees, elbows, every movement deliberate. One wrong press, one scraped wall, one dropped tool, and all would be exposed. Cameras could see him. Guards could hear him. The system could trap him inside forever. But he moved like water. Quiet, smooth, invisible. The shadows of the shaft shifted as blue safety lights from the ceiling above flickered against metal panels. He could feel every vibration. The hum of distant fans, the scrape of a maintenance cart far above, the faint footfalls of a guard who didn't even know he was watching. Malik's heart beat, not fast, but steady, like a metronome syncing with his steps. Focus sharpened to a point where the walls themselves seemed to guide him. Then came the first obstacle. A section of the duct had been repaired poorly. A metal bracket jutted out, too sharp to brush past casually. Malik paused. He took a breath and rotated his body, sliding sideways in a position no man should endure for more than a few seconds. Every second counted. 22, 23 he advanced. Finally, he reached the first junction, a narrow L-shaped bend leading deeper into the network of service corridors. This junction was critical. One mistake here, and the natural airflow would carry dust and debris that could alert sensors. Malik paused again, pressing the tip of his finger into a tiny groove in the metal, a mark he had noticed weeks ago when he first inspected the vent from the inside. The metal shifted slightly under his weight. It creaked, but the creak was swallowed by the hum of the generators. Malik continued. It was hours in the making, or at least it felt like it. In reality, The crawl had been 20 minutes, but the world inside the duct was timeless. Each second stretched like an hour. Each breath carried the weight of months of preparation. Then he saw it, a faint glow, the exit to the restricted maintenance corridor. The next phase, one corridor that led to hallways rarely walked. One corridor that, if navigated carefully, could let him reach the part of the prison few inmates ever saw. But Malik knew this wasn't the time to celebrate. A shadow shifted, not from above, not from the side, but a subtle flicker, a reflection bouncing off the corner of the metal. Guards. Someone had entered the maintenance corridor. A team, unscheduled, probably responding to the code blue from earlier. Malik froze. He could hear the faint whisper of radios through the vents. Coordination, communication, awareness. Too many humans in one place. Yet even as the fear crept in, he remembered Carver's words. You move like water. Be quiet. Flow around the obstacles. Malik shifted, hugging the wall. He waited for their voices to pass, for their flashlights to move, for their attention to scatter elsewhere. And when the moment came, he advanced, inch by inch. Then, finally, he reached a junction that led directly to the top of the corridor stairs, his first real vantage point in months. He peered down. It was clear. Seconds of empty hallway. Seconds that could make the difference between being caught and being remembered. Malik exhaled softly, the tension leaving his shoulders. One more corridor. One more turn. One chance. And he knew the story of this night wasn't over. It was about to be written. Malik's body pressed against the cool metal of the service corridor wall. Every nerve in his body screamed caution, but his mind was sharper than it had ever been. Months of preparation, years of observation, and countless hours of silent calculation had led him here. The faint hum of the prison, normally oppressive, now felt almost like a rhythm guiding his movements. He took a deep breath, listening. The guard's footsteps echoed distantly, fading down another hallway. The corridor was clear. The final stretch to the central utility tunnels, the arteries of ADX Florence, lay just ahead. One wrong step now, one miscalculation, and all of this would end. But Malik had come too far to stop. He moved forward slowly, deliberately, placing each foot where it would not scrape or rattle. He paused at every junction, checking angles, ensuring no shadow, no glint of light, no unexpected vibration betrayed his presence. The world beyond the corridor was a fortress of steel, reinforced concrete, and vigilant humans. But Malik was beyond fear. He had learned that fear is the enemy of precision, and precision was everything. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Malik reached the central utility hub. A labyrinth of maintenance tunnels stretched out before him, passages that few inmates had ever seen. He stopped. For the first time, he allowed himself a small smile. This was it, the space between impossibility and possibility, the moment where all of his patience, all of his observation, and all of his preparation could prove that even the unthinkable was within reach. And then he paused again, because the moment wasn't just about escape. It was about revelation. Malik realized something that no walls, no cameras, no guards could ever contain. Systems, no matter how perfect, have flaws. It is human error, oversight, and blind trust in perfection that creates opportunity. He didn't need to escape to prove it. His journey through ADX had already exposed a weakness. The guards, the administration, the entire system. They had underestimated observation, patience, and intellect. That truth alone was a victory. Malik lingered just long enough to mark the corridor mentally, noting points of vulnerability, blind spots, and timing sequences. Not for himself, but as a testament that ingenuity can exist even in confinement. The first footsteps approached behind him. Guards finally discovering the anomaly. Malik didn't panic. Instead, he allowed himself to be seen, not defiant, not triumphant, calm, measured, a quiet acknowledgement of what had been achieved. When they apprehended him, Malik didn't resist. There was no fight, no dramatics, just a steady gaze of a man who had tested the limits of an institution built to break men, and found that patience, intellect, and observation were more powerful than brute force. As he was escorted back to a higher security unit, the guards whispered among themselves, astonished. I've never seen anyone map the prison like that, not in 20 years. He didn't escape, but he changed the rules. And in the silence of his cell, Malik allowed himself a final reflection. He hadn't walked free. He hadn't toppled walls or run past armed guards. But he had achieved something even rarer. He had forced the fortress to acknowledge its imperfections, and the memory of his attempt would echo through ADX Florence forever. The next morning, every ventilation grate was inspected. Security protocols were rewritten. Guards were retrained to watch more than just inmates. They were trained to watch patterns, shadows, and angles. Malik had not escaped, but he had taught a lesson. Even in the most controlled, impossible places, the smallest observation, the quietest patience, and the sharpest mind can expose cracks in any system. And that was why the story would always be remembered. The ADX escape plot that shocked every guard. For the men behind the walls, for the officers in towers, and for every future observer, the message was clear. No fortress is unbreakable. Perfection is an illusion. And ingenuity, patient, quiet, and relentless, can change everything. Malik sat back on his bunk, eyes on the ceiling. Not a word passed his lips. The story wasn't about freedom. It was about the power of intellect over confinement, patience over force, and observation over assumption. And in that quiet, ADX Florence had been transformed. Not by walls or locks, but by one man who understood the true architecture of opportunity.